So this is video 4.2b in trigonometry, translations of the graphs of the sine and cosine functions. Alright, we're doing example number 2 here, and it says that we're supposed to graph y equals 3 cosine of x plus pi over 4. Alright, so if you remember from the last video, we said that it needs to, if we're in the form of y equals a cosine of x minus d. If our d is positive, then we shift to the right. If our d is negative, we shift to the left. Alright, our sign right here is going to be negative, because if it's x minus a number, over here it says it's x plus, so that means it had to have been x minus a negative number in order for it to turn to a plus. So because it's a negative number, we're going to shift over to the left. Alright, so knowing that, let's go ahead and start with the first procedure that we have. Because there's a plus sign, or there is a number here added or subtracted, but in this case added to the x, we are going to have to do the one method that we did before. We start with 0, less than or equal to x plus pi over 4, less than or equal to our period. And our period for this one is going to be 2 pi, because again there's no number in front here, so there's no period that we're going to have to worry about, so we know it's 2 pi. Alright, so then we go ahead and subtract pi over 4 from all the sides, and we get negative pi over 4 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 2 pi minus pi over 4, which is 7 pi over 4. So there are our two endpoints. Our interval is 2 pi, but our endpoints are at negative pi over 4 and 7 pi over 4. So I'm going to erase all this and just put our intervals on here, because I don't need to show all of that work that we did to find that. So we have negative pi over 4, and we have a 7 pi over 4. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to try to find the halfway point and then the 3/4 and quarter. So we're going to find the halfway point first. So we're going to take 1/2 of the sum of negative pi over 4 plus 7 pi over 4, and that will give us our halfway point. So 1/2 times 6 pi over 4 is going to give me 6 pi over 8, which reduces to 3 pi over 4. So 3 pi over 4 is our halfway. So now we're looking for this number and this number. So this number is halfway between these. So again, I'm going to take 1/2 negative pi over 4 plus 3 pi over 4 equals 1/2 2 pi over 4, which equals 2 pi over 8, which equals pi over 4. So pi over 4 is what we're going to put in that halfway place. So pi over 4 goes here. Now we're going to go and find out this point by taking halfway between there. So again, 1/2 3 pi over 4 plus 7 pi over 4 equals 1/2 times 10 pi over 4, which is 10 pi over 8, which equals 5 pi over 4. So 5 pi over 4 goes there. So there are my 5 places along the x-axis that I'm interested in. So I'm going to draw my x, negative pi over 4, pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, and 7 pi over 4. Now I'm going to take x plus pi over 4. So when I take negative pi over 4 plus pi over 4, I get 0. And I'm just going to kind of write them in here, assuming that you can take 3 pi over 4 plus pi over 4 and get pi. Alright, so that's that step. Now I'm going to take the cosine of x plus pi over 4. So that means I'm going to take the cosine of 0. And when you take the cosine of 0, you get 1. Pi over 2, 0. Negative 1, 0, and 1. And lastly, we're going to multiply that times 3. 3, 0, negative 3, 0, and 3. This last part here tells us what our amplitude is going to be. So my points that I'm going to be graphing are going to be where x is negative pi over 4, my y value will be 3. So let's see if we can move a bunch of this up and out of the way. Alright, so if we can get rid of this, okay. So there's my x values. There we go. I just did that so I could draw my graph here. Alright, so my beginning point is negative pi over 4. So there, it's not 0. What am I doing? It's at 3. That's 3 right there. So it starts at 3. Then I go to my end, which in this case is 7 pi over 4. And when I'm at 7 pi over 4, my y value is also at 3. My halfway point is, it doesn't matter if it's exact, as long as you have an idea of where it goes. 3 pi over 4. And I'm at, let's do it in yellow, I'm at negative 3 down here. And this point right there is, what, pi over 4, and it crosses at 0. And my other one is at 5 pi over 4, and it crosses at 0. So, let's do this in red. I get a graph that looks like that. And it shifted from where it normally would have been, which would have been here. It shifted pi over 4 over. So that's example number 2.